Welcome to our webinar, Peace Talks and People's War, Lessons and Prospects. The International League of People's Struggles celebrates September as Solidarity Month for the Philippines, support the Filipino people's struggles to end Duterte's reign of terror. My name is Peter Murphy from Philippines-Australia Union Link, and I'll be your host this evening. For Bahasa speaking participants, please click the German channel in the translation option. But before we begin, I ask everyone to offer their solidarity to Philippine activists who have been murdered by state forces in the past few months. I'll mention their names. Let's repeat them after me. I'll read them 3 times through. So I'll read and then I'll pause and you repeat. So turn on your microphone. Carlito Badion.
Carlito
Carlito
Badion.
Badion.
Jory Porquilla.
My mic. Jory Porquilla.
Randall Echanis.
Randall Echanis.
Zara Alvarez.
Zara Alvarez.
Carlito Badion.
Carlito Badion.
Jory Porquilla.
Jory Porquilla.
Randall Echanis.
Randall Echanis.
Zara Alvarez.
Zara Alvarez.
Carlito Badion.
Carlito Badion.
Jory Porquilla.
Jory Porquilla.
Randall Echanis.
Randall Echanis.
Zara Alvarez.
Zara Alvarez.
Thank you. Their names, along with countless others, are forever etched in the Hall of Heroes, shining brightly in our hearts and minds. Rest in power, comrades. We have a great lineup of panelists to discuss the status, lessons and prospects of the peace talks between the National Democratic Front of the Philippines and the government of the Republic of the Philippines. This is the third in a 3-part series of webinar discussing the situation in the Philippines. A special greetings to all of you who are with us since number 1. We are privileged to be able to have Juliet de Lima, Interim Chairperson, NDFP Negotiating Panel, Raymond Palatino, Chairperson, Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, NCR, and Peter Brock from Action for Peace and Development in the Philippines, Australia, and Elmer Labog, Chairperson, Kilusang Maya Uno. We expect them to give us deep insights into the developments of the peace talks. So let's get straight into what you come here for. Let us hear Juliet de Lima, Interim Chairperson of the NDFP Negotiating Panel. Please go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, Peter. Good day to all. I am honored to speak on the topic of waging war for a just and lasting peace in the webinar 3 of ILPS ASPAC, focusing on the Philippines. Insofar as the current revolutionary movement is concerned, it was Marcos, the dictator Marcos, who suggested peace negotiations to Joma when the latter was presented to him as a captive on the day of our capture on November 7, 1977. Of course, Joma was in no position then either to accept or cause the start of peace negotiations as early as 1977. He was conscious of the negative example of Aguinaldo. This is Emilio Aguinaldo of the old Philippine Revolution, who who agreed to negotiate in captivity and then issued under duress his capitulationist peace manifesto. But it is quite clear from this incident that even a head of state at the height of his power in a regime challenged by a revolutionary movement recognizes the importance of negotiating for peace. Turning to the revolutionary side of the armed conflict, we in the National Democratic Front recognize the importance of peace negotiations as an excellent opportunity for propagating throughout the country and abroad the program for the People's Democratic Revolution, which encompasses the rights and interests of the working class, the peasantry, the urban petty bourgeoisie, and the national bourgeoisie or the middle bourgeoisie, and even to the extent of splitting some sections of the reactionary classes from the reactionary faction in power. Our objective in engaging in the peace negotiations is identical to our objective in waging the People's War. This is the principled position, excuse me. This is the principled position to which we have held fast from the beginning of the negotiations in 1992 to this day. To violate this position is to betray the revolutionary movement and the aspirations and interests of the entire people. The peace negotiations must yield the reforms, upholding and fulfilling the social, economic, political, and cultural interests of the people, especially the workers, peasants, petty bourgeoisie, and the middle bourgeoisie. To achieve a just and lasting peace, the roots of the armed conflict must be addressed. By adhering to our principled position, we and the NDFP have forged more than 10 agreements with the excuse me.
Are you okay, Kajuli?
Sorry, I had a coughing fit.
Okay.
Yeah, we can resume. By adhering to our principled position, we in the NDFP have forged more than 10 agreements with the GRP as follows. The Hague Joint Declaration in 1992, which serves as the framework for the negotiations. This includes the aim of resolving the armed conflict through formal peace talks under the guiding principles of national sovereignty, democracy, and social justice, as well as the principle of non-capitulation by any of the negotiating parties, the method of negotiating and drafting the comprehensive agreements through reciprocal working committees, and the substantive agenda for forging the comprehensive agreement on A, respect for human rights and international humanitarian law, B, social and economic reforms, C, political and constitutional reforms, and D, the end of hostilities and the disposition of forces. Here it is already made clear that the attainment of a just and lasting peace is to address the roots of the armed conflict through social, economic, and political reforms. The second agreement, the Brooklyn Joint Statement, was signed and approved on June 14, 1994. This is the product of the first exploratory meeting of the GRP and the NDFP negotiating panels after their delayed formation and after the failure of the intervening National Unification Commission to carry out a so-called localized peace negotiations under the direction and control of the GRP and its military. The National Unification Commission was unilaterally created by the GRP on September 2, 1992. And of course, the NDFP objected to the NUC as running counter to the Hague Joint Declaration and criticized it as a scheme to sabotage the peace negotiations and to misrepresent military assets as surrendering NPA fighters as a futile Psy-war attempt to divide and disintegrate the revolutionary movement. Prior to this, it was very clear that the government wanted to backtrack on and nullify the Hague Joint Declaration. This made the NDFP negotiating panel and the entirety of the NDFP ever more alert to the intentions of the GRP in engaging the NDFP peace negotiations. The third agreement was the Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees. This was signed and approved on February 23, 1995. It guarantees the safety and immunity of the negotiating panelists, consultants, advisors, and resource persons, staff, and other negotiating personnel of both the GRP and the NDFP during and after the peace negotiations, irrespective of their results. It stipulates a foreign neutral venue for holding of peace negotiations. It establishes the firm and consistent position of the NDFP for formal talks to be held abroad in order to avert the consequences of GRP military surveillance, which proved adverse to the NDFP negotiating personnel and staff during and after the ceasefire talks and the ceasefire agreement from 1986 to 1987 during the Aquino regime. The GRP military and intelligence agencies perpetrated abductions and murders of the NDFP negotiating personnel when the ceasefire agreement broke down as a result of the Benjola massacre of peasants and their urban supporters on January 23, 1987. The fourth agreement is the Joint Agreement on the Formation, Sequence, and Operationalization of the Reciprocal Working Committees, which was signed and approved in the course of the formal meeting of the GRP and DFP negotiations in Brussels on June 25, 1996. It guides how the comprehensive agreements are to be drafted by reciprocal working committees for negotiations by the negotiating panel in accordance with the substantive agenda. The fifth agreement, additional implementing rules pertaining to the documents of identification, which was signed on June 26, 1996. This agreement reinforces the Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees. It stipulates the exchange of lists and numbers of persons to be mutually agreed upon for coverage by the safety and immunity guarantees. These last two agreements, both sides enabled to set up the respective negotiating panels, consultants, staff, the reciprocal working committee for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law, the Reciprocal Working Committee for Social and Economic Reforms, and the Working Group for the Political and Constitutional Reform. The sixth is the Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law, which in short we call CARIL, between the GRP and the NDFP, which was signed by the GRP and NDFP negotiating panels in The Hague on March 16, 1998. This is the most important agreement so far made by the GRP NDFP negotiating panel and mutually approved by the respective principal. It is the accomplishment of the first item of the 4 items in the substantive agenda of the peace negotiations. It was a product of a total of 6 months of continuous negotiations and drafting by the reciprocal working committees and the GRP and NDFP negotiating panels. A seventh agreement, the joint agreement in support of social economic projects of private development organizations and institutes, was signed on the same date as the CARIL. It is an agreement that allows and encourages socio-economic initiatives by non-government entities. It is valid and effective even before the comprehensive agreement on social and economic reforms is negotiated, and this was mutually approved. But however, none of its provisions have been implemented. The eighth is the joint agreement of the GRP and NDFP negotiating panels on March 9, 2001, which has the signal importance of demonstrating how the peace negotiations can be resumed after a unilateral act of termination by either one of the negotiating parties. Estrada was the first GRP president to terminate the GRP NDFP peace negotiations on May 29, 1999. The agreement to resume the peace negotiations in 2001 reaffirmed the Hague Joint Declaration of 1992 and all other subsequent agreements of the two parties in order to override the act of termination made by the Estrada regime. It was during the time of Arroyo that the GRP and the NDFP agreed to have the Royal Norwegian government as the third-party facilitator responsible for providing the foreign neutral venue for the peace negotiations and the resources for the purpose. The GRP and the NDFP also agreed on the operating guidelines of the Joint Monitoring Committee under the Comprehensive Agreement on Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. This mechanism is important for recording and exchange of complaints under CARIL in order to deal with complaints and ensure the continuity of the peace negotiations. Another significant provision of the joint statement is the GRP assurance to the NDFP that the victims of human rights violations under the Marcos fascist regime would receive indemnification from the Marcos loot recovered from banks in Switzerland. The Philippine Revolutionary Movement is waging not only a protracted people's war, it is also waging a protracted peace process with the counter-revolutionary government. The formal talks in the peace negotiations has already protracted for 28 years since 1992 under the guidance of two important articles written by the chief political consultant, History and Circumstances Relevant to the Question of Peace, published in May 10, 1991, and the NDF framework, in contrast to the GRP framework, published on May 15, 1991. These were published before the onset of the peace negotiations and subsequently set the NDFP's basic position on crucial matters pertinent to the peace process and to the aim of achieving a just and lasting peace. Herein are described what the desirable conditions are for holding peace talks between the government and the NDFP, leading to the resolution of the armed conflict by addressing and eradicating its roots. In 1992, the views expressed in these two articles would be distilled into a single page of text that would be known as the Hague Joint Declaration, which, as I mentioned earlier, has served as the framework agreement that would guide the conduct of the GRP and DFP talks. The talks have faltered and prospered on the basis of how the two parties upheld this agreement. Non-adherence to it by any party made talks impossible. To quote from Ray Claro Casambres, the role of Jose Maria Sison in the peace negotiations. In September 1992, when the Hague Joint Declaration was approved by President Ramos and NDFP Chairman Manuel Romero, very few believed that the negotiations should ever get to the stage of holding formal talks. And when the formal talks began in 1995, very few believed the Philippine government and the NDFP would ever arrive at any formal agreement. And yet now, 10 bilateral agreements and at least 3 major joint statements have been crafted and signed by the two parties, including the Comprehensive Agreement on Respect for Human Rights and International Humanitarian Law. The approval of CARIL gave way to the formation of the Joint Secretariat of the Joint Monitoring Committee, which opened in Cubao in Quezon City, Philippines on June 4, 2004 to receive complaints of human rights violations and international humanitarian law against government and or NDFP forces. The NDFP-JS-JMC has struggled to survive through thick and thin in the last 16 years. Now it is thinly surviving as the Royal Norwegian government has scaled down its support and thus needs other sources of support, including yours, to survive in monitoring human rights violations, especially at this time that Duterte's war against the Filipino people is getting ever more vicious. Any suggestions about how to raise funding support? The GRP has made several attempts at sabotaging the peace negotiations. GRP attempts to backtrack on agreements reached in the peace negotiations have been plenty. After the approval of the Hague Joint Declaration on September 1992, Ramos formed the National Unification Commission for the purpose of supposed localized peace negotiations under the control of the GRP and its military. The appropriate negotiations between the duly authorized negotiating panels of the GRP and the NDFP were delayed for more than 2 years. It would only be in 1994 that the opening of formal negotiations was held in Belgium. Then the negotiations were disrupted by the refusal of the GRP to release from prison one of the negotiators, Sotero Llamas. Since the very outset, we in the NDFP have been aware that the GRP has consistently put negotiations with the NDFP within the framework of its counterinsurgency operational plans or campaigns of military suppression from the time of Aquino down to Duterte. These OPLANs are designed by the GRP military in collaboration with U.S. military advisors under the Pentagon and its Pacific Command. These OPLANs have all failed. Marcos initiated Oplan Katatagan in 1981 during the martial law era, supposedly to defend the state against a rapidly growing New People's Army. Every succeeding administration had its own Oplan with varying names, but all aimed at strategically defeating the revolutionary forces and the people in order to protect the ever-rotting ruling system. Under Corazon Aquino, it was the Lambat Bitag campaign when she unsheathed the sword of war. This was continued under Fidel V. Ramos. And under Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, it was Operation Enduring Freedom, Philippines, and Lambat Bitag, or Operation Fishnet Trap 1, 2, and 3. Under Noynoy Aquino, it was Oplan Bayanihan, and under Duterte's, it is Kapayapaan, or peace, and Kapanatagan, tranquility. This consisted of the traditional military offensives bolstered by political and psychological warfare that are supposed to pave the way for peace and development. The strategy is not new. It was used by the United States in the Philippine-American War. It was used to crush the Huk Rebellion in the 1950s, and it was the mainstay of the Marcos-directed counterinsurgency warfare in the 1970s and 1980s. Thus, even the civil bureaucracy played its role in trying to sabotage agreements reached in the peace negotiations, if not the entire process itself. Under Ramos, the National Unification Commission, headed by Heidi Urak, who was once a colleague in the anti-Marcos struggle, was formed to negate the principle established in the Hague Joint Declaration. Thus, negotiations were suspended until the issue was resolved with the amendment of the executive order that created it in December 11, 1992. Then there were the attempts of the Estrada administration to backtrack on the Carril Agreement, which was resolved after several off-the-table meetings. Sometime after signing the Carril, Estrada sent Senator Drilon in late 1998 to propose to the NDFP to have a supplementary agreement to amend the Carril, but of course, the NDFP refused. From February 24 to May 30, 1999, GRP president suspended the peace talks after the NPA captured 4 prisoners of war, including a brigadier general, Victor Obilio. Despite the release of the 4 prisoners of war, the GRP continued with its suspension of the formal talks for 3 months and 6 days. Then on March 4, 2001, GRP President Estrada formally terminated the peace negotiations with a written notice for the JASIG to be terminated. 2 days after the Senate ratified the Visiting Forces Agreement, negotiated by Estrada, the administration of Estrada with the U.S., which the NDFP deemed as a violation of Philippine sovereignty and constitution. The NDFP said that it recognized the government's de facto termination of the peace talks. And on May 31, 1999, Estrada formally ended the peace talks and terminated the JASIG. On June 10 to 14, 2001, the second round of formal talks in the peace negotiations was held in Oslo, but it was suspended when the notorious human rights violator Cagayan Representative Rodolfo Aguinaldo was killed upon his resisting arrest by an NPA team. Formal talks scheduled for later in the year were suspended, but back-channel talks were conducted between the two parties for the rest of the year and throughout 2002. On August 24, 2004, peace talks stalled due to the failure to resolve the issue of the terrorist listing of the CPP, NPA, and the NDFP chief political consultant. It was Arroyo who had requested the U.S. to designate these entities as terrorists in November 2001. On February 15 to 21, 2011, after 7 years without peace negotiations, formal talks resumed when Benigno Aquino III came to the presidency. At the end of the February talks, however, a 22-month impasse began that led to the government's ending formal talks in April 2013. When Duterte came to power, the formal meetings in the peace negotiations were resumed. But on February 4, 2017, Duterte terminated the peace talks and announced that he will not order the release of 400 political prisoners as he promised. But this was done without issuing any formal document of termination. However, the third and fourth rounds would still occur in Rome and in Noordwijk aan Zee in the Netherlands. Always, the main thrust of the GRP was to try to obtain a protracted ceasefire. On May 23, 2017, Duterte issued Proclamation 2016, proclaiming martial law and the suspension of the writ habeas corpus for the whole of Mindanao. On May 27, the fifth round of peace talks was suspended following the CPP's call for the NPA to intensify offensives on the heel of Duterte's placing Mindanao under martial law due to the conflict in Marawi City. Duterte later said that he was not inclined to resume talks if the rebels continued to collect revolutionary taxes, which he called extortion, from contractors and barangay officials. On July 19, 2017, Duterte canceled back-channel talks with the NDFP after a supposed rebel attack on the Presidential Security Group convoy in Arakan, Cotabato, which was in fact a false flag operation, a fake NPA attack on the so-called presidential security car. The government called on NPA to return its goodwill gesture instead of opposing the extension of martial law in the whole of Mindanao and launching fresh offensives. On October 5, 2017, Duterte said that he may leave it to the next president to pursue peace talks with the communist rebels. He earlier said that the peace talks were a waste of money. Some days later, however, he indicated that peace negotiations might resume, saying that he has to talk to the NPA still. On November 22, 2017, Duterte canceled peace talks with the CPP and DFP, citing recent tragic and violent events all over the country committed by communist rebels. On November 23, 2017, Duterte signed Proclamation 360, which declares the termination of the GRP and DFP peace talks. In fact, he ordered his armed minions to finish off the entire revolutionary movement before 2022. The palace cited the NPA's continued acts of violence and hostilities, even as the government supposedly tried to proceed with peace negotiations. As a last nail on the coffin for the GRP and DFP peace negotiations during the remaining term in office, Duterte issued Proclamation number 374, declaring the Communist Party of the Philippines and the New People's Army as designated identified terrorist organizations under Republic Act number 10168 on December 5, 2017. But on December 5, 2019, Duterte publicly ordered Secretary Bello to meet the NDFP political consultant in Utrecht in order to explore the resumption of peace negotiations, as it is a consistent NDFP policy to be open to peace negotiations with the GRP. The latter readily agreed to the meeting. Thus, from December 7 to 9, 2019, Secretary Bello and Hernando Braganza held informal talks in Utrecht with the team of the NDFP, including our panel chairperson, Fidel Agkawili, and senior advisor, Luis Halandoni, the NDFP chief political consultant, and a few others. Succeeding informal talks occurred from December 19 to 21. In the presence of a representative of the special envoy of the Royal Norwegian government, Katrina Lee Revheim. Among the agreements made as the result of the informal talks was the reciprocal unilateral ceasefire to run from December 23 to 27 on the mutual understanding that it was a measure of goodwill and confidence building to pave the way for the resumption of the peace negotiations, as well as the soonest release by the GRP president of the sick and elderly political prisoners, especially the NDFP consultants, on humanitarian ground and in the spirit of Christmas and the New Year. It should be noted that not a single political prisoner was released on humanitarian grounds in the spirit of Christmas and New Year, contrary to the expectations of the NDFP negotiating panel and the political prisoners and their families. By all indications, Duterte is hell-bent on having no peace negotiations with the NDFP, as much as his scheme is to exterminate the CPP and the NPA as a way of pleasing and maintaining support of the United States. But the NDFP has not publicly declared any objection to the peace advocates asking the GRP to resume peace negotiations with the NDFP. If Duterte refuses, all efforts must be exerted to stop him from ruling beyond 2022 so that his constitutional successor can be the one to decide on the matter of resuming peace negotiations. It remains the moral duty of the peace advocates to persevere in the noble task of peace advocacy and to try to persuade or prevail upon the GRP of whichever administration to engage the NDFP in peace negotiations. Most important of all, the peace advocates must work to unify the people on the necessity of addressing the roots of the armed conflict and laying the foundations for a just peace through economic, social, and political reforms agreed upon in the peace process. Like the NDFP, the peace advocates cannot do anything to persuade the Duterte regime to negotiate if for whatever reason it refuses all the way to its very end. But the work done by the agreement and the agreements made in previous negotiations since 1992 and the continuance and intensification of peace advocacy keep open the prospect of peace negotiations, if not in the time of Duterte, in the time of the next regime. The previous achievements in the form of agreements and accumulated experience and expertise in peace negotiations remain on record and are not lost. In the future, they shall be the foundation for renewed peace negotiations between the NDFP and a new regime that is truly determined to strive for a just peace through economic, social, and political reforms that address the roots of the armed conflict. The offer of Duterte for a ceasefire to confront the COVID-19 pandemic was seriously studied by the NDFP and the Communist Party of the Philippines, and consequently was rejected because it was obvious that Duterte would use the pandemic to impose militarist restrictions and to put the revolutionary movement in a trap. In the meantime, the revolutionary forces and the people themselves have to undertake collective efforts to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and at the same time defend themselves against the continued military assaults under NTF-ELCAC and the various operational plans of the Duterte regime. The offensive operations of the AFP and the PNP include red tagging, abductions, and extrajudicial killings, compelling people to attend fake surrender meetings, staging fake encounters that kill and victimize ordinary peasants, bombing rural communities in certain regions, and forcing the evacuation of the poor peasants and indigenous people, and delivering the land and other natural resources to foreign and big comprador corporations. Duterte has referred to COVID as his motivation for declaring his bogus, malicious, unilateral ceasefire, but he is in fact criminally responsible for the following. He let into the Philippines more than 500 travelers from China, including more than 14,000 from Wuhan since January, while the COVID-19 contagion was raging in China. As a result, COVID-19 has spread nationwide for more than 2 months. He slashed the budget for the Department of Health by more than 10 billion pesos in order to favor military overspending and corruption in his own office and other departments. And he made no effort to prevent the spread of the highly contagious viral virus despite the strong admonitions of international health authorities and experts. In his belated reaction to COVID-19, he has prioritized the setting up of military and police checkpoints in the National Capital Region and then in the whole of Luzon, and the imposition of lockdowns by banning public transport and intimidating the people. He has thereby prevented the people from going to their places of work, and even those in need of testing and treatment for COVID-19 and other illnesses from going to health centers, clinics, and hospitals. On their own account and to their credit, the health workers and private hospitals, mass organizations, churches, charitable institutions, and other non-governmental entities have been the most active in looking after the health and welfare of the people, especially the impoverished ones, assisting them in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic and overcoming harsh militarist impositions and damaging actions of the anti-people Duterte regime. In the guerrilla fronts of the People's Democratic Government, the organs and units in charge of health work based in the local communities and embedded in the New People's Army and the revolutionary organizations. They are in the front line fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. They provide to the people testing and treatment for this, as well as other illnesses, despite the frequent offensive operations of the enemy. In view of the foregoing, the National Democratic of the Philippines is constrained from reciprocating the ill-motivated and ill-founded unilateral ceasefire declaration of the Duterte regime, with or without NDFP reciprocation. The Duterte regime should at least recognize its criminal responsibilities for the entry, spread, and aggravation of the COVID-19 plague in the Philippines, and rectify immediately the wrongs and crimes it has committed against the people. Duterte has used the pandemic to do the following: intensify focused military operations against the NPA, steal public money in the hundreds of billions of pesos promised as ayuda or aid to the millions of families, and a subsidy for mass testing, acquisition of medical supplies, and compensation for health workers. And worst of all, the enactment of the law of unbridled state terrorism in the name of anti-terrorism, the scheme to monopolize information by shutting down the ABS-CBN television network, further militarization of government and increasing budgetary appropriations for the military, and the relentless preparations for charter chains. With the Duterte acts in the extreme against the Filipino people, the NDFP refrains from any action which could be construed as condoning and covering up the criminal acts and responsibilities of the regime, and that would run counter to the mounting outrage of the people and the rapid growth of the broad united front of patriotic and democratic forces, now seeking the soonest possible end of the traitorous, tyrannical, genocidal, corrupt, and deceptive regime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. After hearing Julia de Lima's presentation, you can get the details of the peace process going on between the NDFP and the GRP. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Lima. If you have questions and comments on Juliet's presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom interface and type in your thoughts. Now we move to listen to Raymond Palatino, Chairperson of the Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, National Capital Region, so Bayan NCR. Please welcome Raymond.
Thank you, Peter, and to our participants in this webinar. Thank you to ILPS Asia Pacific for this invitation. Bayan, or Bagong Alyansang Makabayan, is a multi-sectoral alliance of people's organizations, and I am part of the Metro Manila chapter of Bayan. So I will ask the host to share the screen for my presentation. Thank you. So I will outline my discussion by raising some questions, and through these questions, I can present our understanding and thoughts about the peace process. These are the questions. Number one, will peace talks bring immediate change for Filipinos and the Philippines? Second question, has the peace talks produced any significant agreement? And third question, what's the value of peace talks for Metro Manila citizens? And last question, how can we pursue the peace agenda today? With regard to the first question, will peace talks bring immediate change for Filipinos and the Philippines? The answer is both yes and no. Yes, because the intense militarization in the rural areas, the intense military operations in communities have produced suffering among our people. And if the peace talks is resumed, if there are ongoing peace negotiations, one of the agenda can be the withdrawal of these military operations that can bring immediate relief to these communities. And perhaps through goodwill measures, it can also lead to the release of political prisoners. We have more than 500 political prisoners facing trumped-up charges and fabricated evidence. So the peace talks can enhance the conditions for promoting human rights in our communities. But at the same time, we also recognize that the peace process is a long political process. And since this is not just about signing of agreements, it involves political will, it involves sustained political action of all stakeholders. So the change that we are aspiring for will not be immediate. So we recognize, that's why I think I agree with what Ka Julie said, it's also a protracted peace process. And during this period, this is the time when people's organizations, the people's movement should assert our legitimate demands to the government and pursue our vision for a better Philippines where we will address the roots of the armed conflict. For the second question, has the peace talks produced any significant agreement? I am very grateful that Julie enumerated the agreements signed between the GPH and the NDF. These are examples of the agreements that we can discuss to our members. But I'd like to highlight Karil. When Karil was passed in 1998, or I think it was 1999, I think the European Union passed a resolution recognizing how this document will advance the human rights protection as a good mechanism and model for other countries. And the Karil serves as a guiding document to advance and assert our human rights when we are engaging officials and various governments, both local and national governments. So these 10 agreements enumerated by Julie, these are all available online and we can study these documents. So the starting point is the Hague Declaration, Karil, and then for me, what is the most important document and the meat of the peace process is the CASER, or the Comprehensive Agreement on Socio-Economic Reforms. For the third question, what is the value of peace talks for Metro Manila citizens? So, as you may know, the Philippines has a population of 100 million people. 10 to 12 million people are residing in Metro Manila. As far as I know, there are no New People's Army units in Metro Manila. So why are Metro Manila People's Organizations supporting the peace process? Why are Metro Manila People's Organizations discussing the history, the prospects of the peace process? As I mentioned earlier, one of the important documents is CASER. CASER is very important because it is a blueprint for national and nationalist economic development. It is important for workers, for the urban poor, and for the rural poor. It is a comprehensive primer about the situation of the grassroots, an alternative history of the local economy, and a program of action to overhaul the political economy. As a social reform measure, it seeks to provide the following pro-poor services for free. For example, land distribution, irrigation, support services to farmers, legal assistance and titling services to single mothers and widows in rural areas, comprehensive childcare, education in all levels, continuing training for teachers and health personnel, and healthcare up to tertiary level. As an economic treaty, it offers a refreshing perspective on economic growth, that it should be based on reduction, that it should develop the rural resources and produce an industrial base, that it should enhance sustainability, that the state and not big business should manage and direct economic planning, that it should strive for independent foreign trade policy, and that the rights of the people are prioritized. Another important provision in the CASER is that the building of a strong economy involves the protection and rehabilitation of the country's natural resources. CASER wants to end open pit mining, large-scale reclamation, export monocrop production, and logging for export. No mining activities will be allowed in small islands, coastal ecosystems, primary forests, watersheds, and prime agricultural lands. Our understanding here is that growth is meaningless if the welfare of the people is ignored. CASER devotes several sections enumerating the rights of the poor and powerless in society. It lists several draconian laws and regressive agencies that have to be removed in order to uphold democracy and civil liberties. And finally, CASER promotes the teaching of nationalism among our youth. This last point is not only symbolic but politically significant, because one requirement in developing a strong national economy is the emergence of a nationalist sentiment among the population. It isn't enough that nationalist economic program exists. The people have to embrace it. The youth must have confidence in the capacity of Filipinos to build a new economy, produce our own needs, enrich the countryside, and create innovative industries. That is why when we supported the resumption of the peace process in 2016, it became in the form of an education movement. Through mass assemblies, the political movement in support of the peace process highlighted these reforms as contained in the CASER. So if we will present the next slide. So there was initial enthusiasm for the peace talks. That is why we enjoined peace consultants like the murdered political consultant Randy Echanis in going around cities. And we got the support of local cities. Here you have the Vice Mayor of Marikina City and the former Vice Mayor of Quezon City and now Mayor of Quezon City, which is one of the largest cities in Metro Manila, supporting the resumption of the peace process. Because even if we are in Metro Manila, the conflict affects us all because human rights violations are being perpetrated everywhere. Poverty is endemic in both rural and urban areas. So the local government units' resolutions in support of the peace process highlighted the need to resume the peace process and address the roots of the armed conflict. And through these mass assemblies, we want to educate various stakeholders, especially young people, but also other sectors, including the business community, about the need to understand the peace process and why we should support the peace process, because the reforms that will be the result of the peace process will benefit everyone, both rural and in urban areas. And finally, for the last question, how can we pursue has been terminated by the Duterte government? There is no ongoing peace negotiation, but we believe there is a necessity in continuing the discussion about the proposals contained in the CASER. Related to this, it is important to explain among our people why there is an ongoing armed conflict in the Philippines. And through this understanding why there is an armed conflict in the Philippines, we can understand the roots of this conflict. We can understand the reasons why there is a raging war in the countryside, how landlessness fuels this conflict in remote regions in the Philippines. So aside from understanding the roots of the armed conflict, we have to vigorously protect and defend our human rights. And we are using the provisions in the CARIL in engaging local and national officials about the need to stop torture, about the need to stop food blockades, hamletting. These are all issues mentioned in the CARIL. And aside from that, we have to unbox CASER. The numerous provisions in CASER can be introduced to local governments, can be introduced as a piece of legislation in Congress. It can also be used as reference for various political campaigns, because we believe the peace process should not just be happening when there is peace talks. It should be a continuing political process. Part of our resistance in the Oust Duterte movement is this discussion about the need to pursue and implement the reforms contained in the peace process. And also, part of our task is to talk to political parties, especially those who will compete in the 2022 elections, and explain to them why there is need to discuss the proposals in the peace process. So my final point, the peace talks have never been and should never be exclusive to NDF and representatives of the elected government. It is a public process requiring public participation and democratic consensus. We need to embrace it as an act of politics that can potentially spark a genuine transformation in Philippine society. Our slogan is just peace, but at the same time, we have to make this slogan, make peace a reality in our lifetime. Maraming salamat po, mabuhay, and good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raymond. For the Philippines, the success or the failure of the peace talks has great implications to its development as a nation. So that presentation is very helpful for us, Raymond. Don't hold back on your comments and questions, click on the Q&A button. There's only a couple of questions there at the moment. There at the bottom of your Zoom interface, please type in your thoughts. Now we have a keen observer of the developments in the Philippines, especially the peace talks. Let's turn our attention now to Peter Brock from the Action for Peace and Development in the Philippines, Australia.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me and allowing Action for Peace and Development to join this really important forum and webinar. I sit on the lands of the Indigenous people of Australia, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present and emerging, and recognise that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also thank the Filipino people and the National Democratic Movement for the courageous struggle and advocacy that you have carried out over decades, the 4 decades that I have been privileged to be connected and related to the Philippines and the national democratic struggle in the Philippines, and the inspiration that I draw from it. What I want to bring is, I guess, an international solidarity perspective on the peace talks and the peace process on the Philippines and the relevance to us in Australia. We act in solidarity with the Filipino people because our liberation is bound up with your liberation. A victory for the Filipino people is not only a victory for yourselves, but it's a victory for us around the world. The mechanisms of repression that are employed in the Philippines, as well as the strategies and the particularly the terrorist tagging as a pretext to both delegitimize the progressive movement in the Philippines, but also to turn a back on the peace process and the peace talks in the Philippines, is tactics which are used worldwide. Those tactics are used in Australia to legitimize the workers' movement, to attack and undermine those who are supporting human rights around the world, and in particular the Philippines, and also for our Indigenous peoples to essentially legitimize their just claims for both land rights, but to recognizing their disadvantage in Australia. So we learn many things from the Philippines, but looking at particularly the issue of the peace talks, as has been made very clear by both Juliet, but also Raymond speaking before me, the comprehensive character of the process and the courageous but comprehensive and diligent way that the National Democratic Front in particular has engaged in the process has been inspirational, alongside many other inspirational aspects of the progressive movements in the Philippines, work and actions over the decades. Well, I want to point to a few things. First of all, the process of establishing both the CARIL and then working towards the comprehensive agreement on socio-economic reforms shows that alongside the struggle against the forces of darkness, can we say, we see that the progressive movements promotes a positive vision of what the future can be, where international norms protecting human rights and international humanitarian law can be applied and can be achieved through the peace process, and that concrete steps and concrete proposals and negotiations to address the underlying causes of human rights violations and socioeconomic disadvantage can be taken. That's inspiring, and it says that there is a legitimacy to the movements and the aspirations of people's movements around the world who share that vision in their local situation. We know, for instance, also that Australia trains AFP military officers, that officers including General Jovito Palparan trained in Australia, learned military tactics and things from the Australian government, and then now there are forces, military forces from Australia who are engaging in training the AFP and providing training to the Armed Forces of the Philippines in urban warfare, particularly tactics, but tactics that can be employed against the Filipino people. So we're campaigning on those issues, and we're campaigning in solidarity with the Philippines, but it's also changing the character, seeking to change the character of how the Australian government views its role in the region and Australia's role in the region. So through learning things and understanding what's happening in the Philippines, we've learned also about the nature of the Australian government and the Australian government's tactics, including our own anti-terrorism law, which has been brought in stark detail once we learned that many of the wordings that have been adopted in the Philippine Anti-Terrorism Act, including the definition of terrorism, were borrowed from the Australian legislation. And so it highlights to us that part of our struggle is to identify that and work against that. It's our view, and it continues to be the role of solidarity organisations in the Philippines, in Australia, in solidarity with the Philippines, that the success of the peace talks strikes fear in many of sections of Philippine society. The privilege that essentially build their wealth and power on the semi-feudalist engagement in land and in that part of the economy, as well as the expanding capitalist sections linked to international capital. We see also that what is going on is a militarization, as we knew it under the Marcos regime of the civil administration, with so many generals and ex-military people taking roles within the civil administration and civil government, and essentially saying that there is a total war that involves the whole of government in a war against the so-called communist insurgency. And that allows a red tagging not only of human rights activists, workers and peasant organisation leaders, and women's activists and Indigenous peoples activists, but also tends to also paint anybody who might be in a more centrist position as one part of that crowd. That sort of reality is happening and impacting in Australia. We just last night had a PCPR Australia webinar where we could see that there was real engagement of significant numbers of church people, including in support of encouraging Australia to adopt a progressive and appropriate stance in response to the United Nations Council of Human Rights consideration of further action in response to Commissioner Michelle Bachelet's report on the human rights situation in the Philippines. We can see that the Duterte regime seems to be of a more egregious character, and that is certainly restoring some of the solidarity links within Australia and the organisational support that Solidarity with the Philippines enjoyed in the 70s and the 80s. And it's a very positive development. And it reflects not only the egregious nature, but the vitality, the persistence of the progressive movement in the Philippines, and inspires us to see that action in Australia in support of the Philippines in solidarity has a very valuable role in expressing solidarity, telling the Filipino people that we are with them in their struggle, but we recognize that also our liberation and our struggle is bound up with that of the Filipino people. Thank you again for the opportunity to share, and I welcome any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Peter Brock, for that excellent commentary. The comments and questions you have, please put them into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now it's time to actually go into hearing what the participants want to ask to our panelists. And we've got some questions I can read out to you now. So this is these questions can be answered by any of those people, Mr. Lima, Mr. Palatino, Mr. Brock, and also Mr. Labog, who we'll hear from soon. So the first question is from Bruno Di Biasi of the Italian Migrant Workers Organisation, FILEF, in Sydney. Is there awareness among the Filipino people at large of the peace negotiation process? And what support is there among the people at large and political conglomerates or other parties and movements for the peace negotiations? So who's going to go first?
I think I can answer.
Thank you, Raymond.
Of course, the Filipino people are aware of the ongoing or of the peace process before, but how this is being presented in mainstream media and how politicians are framing the peace process, that is another thing. That is why people's organizations, especially those based in the grassroots, are actively discussing the reasons for pursuing the peace process and explaining the issues being deliberated in the peace process. So in 2016, there was initial enthusiasm among local officials, as I mentioned earlier, and political parties supported the resumption of the peace process. But Duterte terminated the peace process because of his decision to pursue an all-out war policy. And so our efforts now are focused in defending human rights, in pursuing legitimate, valid reforms in our respective communities. So the peace agenda is still being discussed, but at the same time, we are aware about the deteriorating human rights situation that we have now under the Duterte government.
Thank you, Raymond. Julie, do you want to comment, or Elma? If not,
hello.
Yes, Elma.
Yeah, as one of the sectors that are usually brutalized by previous and current regimes, we are very active in discussing the developments in terms of the peace talks, and we are aware that previous and current governments, the current government have been canceling the peace talks, but But then we're very happy that despite these attacks on the ground, the negotiating panel of both sides were able to come up with 10 very important agreements. I understand that in 2017 there was a joint draft agreement between the NDFP and the GRP, which outlines the implementation of a rural development program. And this rural development program is very much important, that it outlines on a specific grounds the implementation of a genuine land reform program. No country in the world has ever developed into a rich nation without really developing its agriculture. So in terms of the situation in the Philippines, it has been several decades already, and yet we are still a semi-colonial and semi-feudal, we're in a semi-colonial, semi-feudal setup. That means agriculture is so much backward. So I think with this agreement, I think there are very important points that we can draw from and assert the implementation of rural development and eventually the development of our own economic system, starting with the formation of basic industries in the Philippines.
Thank you, Elmer. The next question is directed to Juliet, but anyone could also respond after her. So the question is, from your presentation, Duterte does not really want any peace talks, but he keeps sending negotiators to do back-channel talk. Would you consider the point that Duterte is using the negotiators to fool and hoodwink the NDFP? How can the NDFP discern a genuine olive branch of peace to one that is poisoned? Julie, you could unmute your microphone.
Sorry.
Okay.
The last part, I didn't get the last part of the question. How can
the NDFP discern a genuine olive branch of peace to one that is poisoned?
Yeah, of course. We are always alert to the schemes of Duterte. He's a very tricky and person. As a matter of fact, he claimed to have been a socialist and that he would pursue the peace negotiations and even mentioned a coalition government. None of his promises have ever come true. So we are worried of all his approaches to pursue the peace negotiations. As I told you, even the offer of a ceasefire to confront the COVID pandemic had to be studied very closely, and then by the entire organization, and then we opted for a unilateral actions to confront the COVID pandemic. Yeah, we are aware that what Duterte offers is a so-called peace process within the framework of the counterinsurgency campaign. So that's and we have always tried to respond to these initiatives of his negotiators to try to continue the peace negotiations. So we discuss with them the issues, but there is always a catch to their offers, to their solutions. It is always a stop to the operations of the New People's Army, and that's always the bottom line. And stopping the operations of the New People's Army mean that the people will have no protection. Even his offer of free land distribution is not really free land distribution. You really have to look into the process of how he's pursuing the so-called free land distribution to the peasants. And the administration is very insofar as the peasants are concerned, it has been very repressive. That is why Randy Ichanes has been so brutally murdered. That's how the government hates the proposals of the NDFP or the demands of the people for land reform.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. The next question is for Raymond. It seems even peace advocates are being terror tagged by the Duterte regime to dissuade anyone to advocate for peace. What can peace advocates do to counter this anti-peace motivation of Duterte?
Okay, so we're doing two things. One is we are resisting the terror tagging. We are opposing the terror tagging. It basically criminalizes and demonizes activism. So we're telling those who terror tag, those who use this tactic to dissuade people from pursuing the peace agenda, we're telling them that it is not just politically incorrect, but it enables the killings and other forms of violence against activists. The second response is that we are broadening the peace constituency so that the people who will support for peace talks are not just activists or members of Bayan or ILPS members, but a broader segments of the population will emerge and support the peace process.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question, the peace talks is between the NDFP and the GRP. And through a quick glance, anyone else seems like an outsider. Is there a role or space for solidarity from other nationalities for the resumption of the peace talks between the NDFP and the GRP? That's for anybody who wishes to answer.
I'd like to respond to that, if I can.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Look, of course, we respect the sovereignty and the independence of the Philippines. However, Australia's already involved. I talked about our military aid to the Philippines, military training to the Philippines, but also Australian businesses and economic interests are active in the Philippines. There is two major sort of mines that we've been particularly focused on. One is the Oceana Gold project in Nova Vizcaya, where that's in a hiatus at the moment, but very interesting, we'll follow the contribution of the executive officers and other people from Oceana Gold advocating around the Mining Act, advocating for tax holidays and things like that. impacting on the welfare of the Philippine communities around that mine site. The second mine is the Tampakan mine in Mindanao, a tobacco mine which essentially was identified by an Australian corporation, Western Mining, and went through successive Australian ownerships through Xstrata and even Glencore through its Queensland division, Queensland Australia division. They linked with Paul Dominguez, who was the executive officer and chairperson of the Sagittarius Mining, which is a Philippine entity owned by essentially Australian interests for most of its life, which had the official ownership of the Tampakan mine. And of course, we know Paul Dominguez was a senior government official under the regime of Fidel Ramos, but his brother Sunday Dominguez is, of course, very close to Duterte, a cabinet minister and a promoter of Duterte's campaign in 2016 to win with the presidency. My point is that Australian interests are already involved economically. They're already involved through military training and advocacy. Australia's interests advised and assisted in the drafting of the 1995 Mining Act in the Philippines and have supported that development, saying Australian mining is good for the Filipino people, though the communities in the Dipio around the OceanaGold mine would disagree. As well as, of course, the impact with the Anti-Terror Act. And there was, from all reports from the Philippine government, Australian input in designing that act. That's because these are the reasons why I think we respect the sovereignty, but we take responsibility for Australian roles in supporting some of the anti-people initiatives of and actions and stances of the Duterte regime. That's why we urge peace-loving peoples worldwide, in particular Australians, to support the peace process as a prime example and exemplar of the for nations and peoples how to address root causes of oppression and conflict in a myriad of ways, including a negotiation process. And this is a crucial solidarity contribution of the National Democratic Movement in the Philippines to the oppressed peoples of the world seeking true peace and liberation. And through that process, the National Democratic Front of the Philippines has shown itself a serious participant in building genuine peace through a comprehensive approaches embodied in the peace process. We believe that through study groups, we can learn much about the roots of armed conflict, but also avenues to address and engage in a very positive way and to win some gains for people. That's important. And Karail, for instance, is a gain for the people of the Philippines and particularly the communities experiencing militarization. But moreover, to have that solidarity and support for the peace process, because at the very least it amplifies the issues and the concerns of the Filipino people.
Thanks very much, Peter. Would any of the other presenters like to comment on that question about the role of other nationalities or organisations to support the peace talks between NDFP and GRP? Okay, we're going to move right along. I'd like to thank everybody who put forward the questions and answered and made those great answers to the queries. The time is really running out for our webinar. So I'd just like to say we're not done yet. I would like everyone to shift their attention to Elmer Labog, who's the chairperson of the Kilusang Maya Uno Labour Centre, and he's going to give a wrap-up or a closing statement for the whole event tonight. So go ahead, please, Elmer, unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Peter. Comrades and friends, first of all, I'd like to thank all those participating in our webinar sponsored by the ILPS Asia Pacific, focusing on the Philippines. This is the concluding part of our three-part webinar series. The first to discuss the Philippines chronic crisis and the corresponding program for the national democratic struggle. We end this series on the prospects and lessons culled from our experience in waging the struggle for a just and lasting peace. Foremost in our experience is the working class leadership over the entire new democratic struggle in attaining the aspirations of the Filipino people. The new normal being touted by the reactionary and exploiting classes amid the global crisis aggravated by a pandemic can neither recover nor solve the deep-seated crisis of the world monopoly capitalist system and Philippine society. Only by the clear understanding, study, organizing, and mobilization of the working people in their mass struggles can end the ages-old systemic moribund crisis. This leadership of the working class is fully exercised in the Philippine struggle, including negotiations for peace amid the ongoing People's War. The pro-imperialist and anti-people agenda of the various regimes from Marcos to Duterte has been for the capitulation and complete surrender of the People's Revolutionary Forces. This was done with the Moro National Liberation Front, MNLF, with the signing of the Tripoli Agreement in 1976 and the subsequent Bangsamoro Organic Law of 2018, following peace negotiations with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. However, experience has proven that the Moro struggle still continues with new forces. We have seen this in the aftermath of United Nations-backed settlements in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Colombia, and others. The flames of revolution continue to be fueled by people's aspirations for justice and better life. And the best guide for the victory of the working people is the summation of the working class struggles over the past centuries. The Filipino working class has also learned from its own past experiences. And speaking of significant past experiences, September 16, just the other day, is the 29th anniversary of the junking of the extension of the U.S. military bases in the Philippines. However, with the passage of the Visiting Forces Agreement, the American troops has gone back to Philippine soil and in a wider area. So, secondly, the Filipino Revolutionary Forces, led by the working class, is expanding its mass base as they engage the reactionary regime backed by imperialist forces. Various military operational plans have been devised, as discussed earlier by Ka Juliet, since the Marcos martial law regime to nip in the bud the growth of the People's Army. The political killings, including those of leaders, activists, and peace consultants, such as in the case of Randy Malayaw and Randall Echanes under the present regime, have not stemmed nor stopped the growth of the revolutionary forces cherished by our own people and supported by the world in international solidarity. In fact, it is the U.S. Duterte regime who's being isolated politically and diplomatically. And thirdly, under working class leadership, we are binded strongly with strict organizational unity of will and action, of discipline and initiative. Our collective efforts continue to recruit, train, and deploy more and more full-time activists and leaders to take up the growing tasks and responsibilities while the people struggle, surge us forward to a new and higher level. Even those abroad have been more keen in doing painstaking mass work among compatriots and gathering more solidarity allies from other oppressed peoples and nations, and doing advocacy and lobby work in various international bodies. It is excellent that this September was declared as Philippine Solidarity Month by ILPS Pacific Region. We are prepared for the September 21 actions, and I wish to invite you to the September 21 Global Solidarity Action against the intensifying fascism under COVID, and the call to stop the killings in the Philippines. We assure that lives offered by peace consultants Randy Malayo and Randy Chenes have not been in vain. We shall exact justice. We also offer our tribute to Fidel Agkawili, who passed away as the chief negotiator of the National Democratic Front and who tirelessly worked with the Filipino working class and people to achieve freedom, democracy, justice, and lasting peace. And before I end, please join us in our calls in social media protests today, before the day ends, in calling for hashtag End Duterte Tyranny and hashtag Global Solidarity Philippines. So thank you very much. Mabuhay kayo. Long live the Philippine struggle for liberation. Long live international solidarity. Salamat.
Thank you very much, Elmer Labog. We need to conclude now, but this is the conclusion, as Elmer has said, of the whole webinar series for Philippine Solidarity Month by ILPS Asia Pacific. We want to extend our heartfelt thanks to all the speakers, and of course thank you, maraming salamat, salahat, to our participants today, and especially those who are with us since Series 1. You know who you are. We would also like to see you during September 21. I think Elmer has spelled it out, at 1:30 p.m. Philippine time especially. This is going to be led by ILPS Asia Pacific, the Asia Pacific Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, and Migrante Asia Pacific. So for now, we pause, but our fight and struggle for a better Philippines and a better world continues. Long live the Filipino people. Long live international solidarity. We're going to go out with a song, The Peace We Want, a song by Danny Fabella and performed by Pañuelito in Canada. Mabuhay sa lahat.
So this is our song for the U.S. troops in the Philippines. You'll know what we mean when we get to the chorus part.
Sky without your warplanes, where doves are free to fly. This is the peace we want, the place we long to live in. This is the life we long to be. The playground for our children, but not your war game zone. Clothing, food, and shelter, not your bullets and bombs. This is the peace we want, the place we want to live in. Lord. This is the peace we want, the place we want to live in. This is the life